real quick. And I don't know if we're just going to have a small group tonight or if more people are going to join in. But welcome. I'm glad to see everybody. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and enjoyed the break time. I know I desperately needed it. And sadly, though, I'm counting down to winter break already, which just is not a good thing. So I'm sure you guys are probably feeling the same way. I remember vividly how crazy kids got between Thanksgiving and Christmas or the winter break. So I feel your pain, even though, like I said, I'm working with a little bit older student.
Yes, ma'am.
So tonight I wanted to do a couple things with you guys. I want to walk you through the final exam, so that if you have any questions or concerns about that, we can get those answered. And then I made a ridiculously long PowerPoint. I think it's like 40 some odd slides. Rest assured, we're not going through all of that. Some of that is just resource information. So I'll try to make it not as painful as I can. So without further ado, let me go ahead and start sharing, and let's talk about the final exam. So you'll notice in module 6 or week 6, you had a ton of stuff to do. So I do apologize for that. You know, if you haven't finished your mid-course check or your case study number 3, just remember that is going to be due this coming Sunday. Those of you that have done those, I graded them tonight. Unless you submitted it after 4 p.m., you should have a grade there for that, as well as a reflective question. But specifically, let's look at the final exam. So let me get this to open here, hopefully. Okay, and here. So there's 2 parts to the final exam. Hang on, let me pull this back up. Can y'all see the final exam instructions okay now? Thanks, Mary. Appreciate the affirmation. So this is part 1. So using all of your resources, you're going to create, a PowerPoint presentation of 20 to 25 slides, or a video of 3 to 5 minutes in length, or you're going to write a paper, 15 pages. And as somebody pointed out to me that I just missed it, it was a typo. On page 2, if you were thinking about doing the video, I had actually listed it as being 30 minutes long. I'm really not asking for a movie. So I did go in and correct it and reload it. So it's just 3 to 5 minutes. So if you were thinking about a video, that may make it a little more palatable than a 30-minute movie kind of thing. So as a part of this, you're going to just do something to address the following statements. And so hopefully this is not too painful. You know, but during this course I've learned, you know, I wish I had learned. Like I said, they're not earth-shaking kind of questions or whatever. So some people have been concerned too. They're like, how do I get to 20 to 25 slides when there's only 10 questions? So what I would do if I were doing this, you know, my first slide, maybe I would say, during this course I've learned, I'd list what I'd learned. And then on the next slide, I would give an example. So for example, in my school, you know, let's say one of the things you learned was how to unpack a standard. So at my team meeting, you know, this month, I brought in the UBD template for unpacking a standard and shared it with my colleagues. So that gives you 2 slides for 1 question. So kind of makes sense? And like I said to you, I'm not looking for dissertations here, but give me enough information so that I can tell from your PowerPoint that you can not only answer the question, but most importantly, you can apply what you've learned. Because as we all know, you know, it's one thing to memorize and regurgitate, it's another to actually use what you've learned within your context or within your classrooms, okay? So, pretty simple. You have 3 different ways to deliver that. The final exam, parts 1 and 2, are not due until the 14th of December. Now, keep in mind, though, normally our courses end on Sunday. During the last week, excuse me, everything closes on Saturday. So if you're one of those students who waits until Sunday to sit down and submit your assignments, you're going to be locked out. They literally lock Moodle at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, December the 14th. There's also in your course an additional like 2 days, the 15th and 16th, that says mandatory accreditation. That's something that we are all supposed to be doing. I know in the College of Business where I actually work, we're already doing that as part of our accreditation. Education's a little bit behind everybody else, so just disregard that. So you don't have to do that accreditation piece, which is nothing more than like 5 questions that we have to ask you to gather some data to use as part of our accreditation process. So you don't have to do that, okay? So pretty simple, hopefully. Let's go back now and look at week 7 and the final exam, which I finally got everything posted today. So I apologize for that. I thought I had it, and I don't know, it just got lost somewhere in the stratosphere of the internet. Okay, so let's look first at the directions. And they're actually posted, you know, here. So let me pull them up. Oh, sorry, it's going to move it. Let me move it over to this screen. And hopefully you guys can see it. Okay, can everybody see where it says EDL 710 Final Exam Part 2? Okay, so in your folder for Part 2, you're going to find the School Leaders Series, School Leaders Licensure Assessment. So it's SLS, SLLA, which is a mouthful, Study Companion. I'm not expecting you to read that whole thing. Just kind of review it and skim it. You're going to choose one topic, and I've listed what the topics can be. This correlates perfectly to the table of contents, and I've even given you the pages that you're going to, quote, teach a student who's going to be taking the test for certification as a principal, and how they can be successful. So let's say I really want to know more about developing my study plan. So I know that's going to be found on pages 33 through 36 of the guide, which is posted there in the folder for you. And I'm going to read those pages and decide how I'm going to teach a lesson on developing a study plan, okay? So what you're going to do then is, let me switch here. You're going to go to the TTLP template. It's posted twice because one's a Word document, one's PDF. Some people prefer one or the other. Let's just pull that up. And again, I got to move it. Hang on. Let me move it back over here where y'all can see it. So I'm going to be teaching my lesson on creating a study plan. So what is my learning goal? So what is it I want my students to be able to do? Well, my students that I'm teaching about how to develop a study plan is that students will be able to develop a study plan that includes actions, timelines, and checks for understanding with 90% accuracy. Okay, that's my learning goal. What evidence? So how will I know that they actually understand this? Well, for me, and actually I'm doing this in my freshman seminar class, we are not using the SLS, but we're doing study plans. So how will I know is, well, I'm going to be looking at their student work samples and obviously their completed plan. So what will they produce is going to be that, you know, my students will have mastered a study plan when they submit a study plan that meets the requirements you know, set forth or something like that. So task, what is the main activity that students will be working on in this lesson? Well, we had to really spend some time. You might want to say, we need to spend time helping students understand what a study plan is. How do you use it? What are critical elements? What makes them effective? So, you know, those would be the kinds of tasks that I would list there. Don't list more than 5, but at least 1 or 2. Okay, what are the tools and resources and materials that I need to give my students to? So for example, for them to successfully complete their study plan, I'm going to provide them with a template. I'm going to give them an exemplar. I'm going to give them some books about studying, things like that. Prior knowledge. So what prior knowledge will students use to draw on this? Maybe their time management skills, or other times they've written goal setting plans, like I said, anything like that. What's the essential question? So at the end of the lesson, I want students to be able to tell me, you know, what are my most effective strategies that I can use to study effectively for final exams, okay? Task launch. So how are you going to introduce and set up this to ensure that students can begin? Well, you know, you may want to review the material that's in the guide on those pages. You may want to, as the first thing, do an assessment, a pretest to see what they already know about study plans. So anything like that that might be your very first activity. Okay, on the next page, so what are some likely solutions as well as supports that our students need? So for example, one of the things that, you know, when students are setting up study plans, I want to make sure that they are reasonable in the amount of time that they spend. One of their problems might be that I need to really help them understand that it's not appropriate to create a study plan and use it when you're also browsing on your phone or listening to music or watching TV or playing a video game or all these other things that they do. What are those supports? So, you know, for me, those supports are going to be what is, you know, how will you ensure that you have a quiet, productive study environment? You know, how will you avoid distractions? So any questions like that should work. Possible errors and misconceptions. A lot of times when students are doing a study plan, they think that they only need 2 hours to study for their biochemistry final exam, which is, you know, 200 questions long. So a possible error could be that they underestimate the amount of study time they need, or something along those lines. Instruction supports. So, you know, I may actually model for them how to create a plan. You know, I may give them some tips. In fact, we've actually done this, you know, on how to effectively read and take notes. I may need to ask them, do they know about Cornell note-taking and how to use that as a part of a study plan? Okay, selecting and sequencing. So what is it that you want the students to be able to share as a part of your teaching? So for me, you know, if students, like one of my students is really great at making flashcards. So I had her show everybody how she made her flashcards and use those to study. So that may be one of those sharing pieces. So what are the connections that the students would make? So, you know, okay, a study plan, is that really different than maybe an exercise plan or a nutritional plan? So what are those things that maybe where you've done planning in the past, can you pull in to help you create the most effective study plan? And then this is the monitoring tool. And again, it's just basically taking these questions that you did here and deciding where they belong. Is it assessing? Is it advancing? Who or what is going to do these questions and in what order? So these are for good solutions or products. These are for those unexpected things that we all know can happen. You don't have to do 4 and 1. You can do 2 and 3. You can do 2 anticipated solutions, 3 unanticipated solutions. You can reorder this however you want, okay? So again, there's not necessarily a right answer on this. It's more a matter of, is what you're doing make sense in terms of ensuring student success in meeting that learning goal. So whatever you start with, you should be able to support through each one of these specific elements within the plan. Okay, kind of makes sense? Hopefully. Okay, so I know that I'm not that fabulous and, you know, I didn't explain it that well. Hopefully you guys are pretty comfortable with this though, because it's just taking everything we've talked about, whether it's UBD design or unpacking a standard or whatever, and applying it. It's just the tool that I want you to use is going to be that SLLA study guide, because many of you are going to be taking the SLLA, so it's nice to get you at least a little bit involved in it. But the TTLP, or Thinking Through the Lesson Protocol Template, can be used for any content, any subject. Like I said, I just chose the SLS because I want you to think it through and apply, hopefully, what you've learned. So on December the 14th, you're going to submit 2 things in week 7, module 7. Part 1, either the video, the PowerPoint, or the essay, and this template. So those are the 2 things that you're going to send to me by 11:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Saturday, December the 14th. and you're going to get a great A, and you're going to be like so excited that you will be done with EDL 710. Okay, any questions, comments, concerns? I know I've got all the superstars with me tonight, so I wasn't too worried about y'all. Okay, so let's switch gears here just 1 second. Let me kind of close some of this out. No, don't do that, Tracy. Hang on, I got to find the right place. Darn it, I think I did close it out. Okay, one more here. Sorry, I've got too much on my desktop right now, trying to do offer letters to new professors, and so it's just, I've got them all saved and it's like a mess. All right, let me log back into Moodle real quick, so bear with me, guys. I accidentally logged myself out. Okay, I think we're good on that. So let me pull up now the PowerPoint. And let me share again once it opens. Eventually, there it goes, okay. All right, so let's kind of walk through, or fly through, I guess would be the better term. The kind of the closeout part, I guess, of what we've been doing in EDL 710. So it's kind of hopefully bringing it all together. And like I said, this is a ridiculously long PowerPoint. It has 53 slides. I'm not going to walk you through 53 slides. You guys are grown-ups and you can read. So let's talk about sort of the procedure. So if you're thinking about leading instruction and leading assessment, we have talked a lot about that triad of how everything has to be aligned between curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And that if you have a point of misalignment, you may be doing a great job teaching, but if you're not teaching the stuff that's being assessed, we have a problem. If you've got a great curriculum and you've got the right stuff to teach, it's aligned to the assessment, and we know that those two pieces match, if we don't have strong teaching or instruction in the classroom, again, we create problems. So let me give you a concrete example. When I was assistant superintendent in Dallas, we had one of our most effective high school principals. And so, like I said, very strong, one of the best. And she stands up in a principal's meeting and says, all right, look, I have a real problem. She said, my Algebra 1 results were not at all what we had hoped for. They are certainly not where they should be. And she said, but here's the problem. I was told that if I followed the district's math or Algebra 1 curriculum with fidelity and diligence and all of that, and she said, I made sure my teachers did that. You know, I even had external people come in and assess their teaching. So we were following the curriculum like you told us to. We had great teaching. We have tons of data to back that up, but our results stink. So obviously there was a huge problem. So as we began to really delve into that, what we found was the curriculum that the district had created and told our principals they had to use was not aligned with our state assessment. So critical issues can arise when we don't have alignment. So how do we go about doing this? Well, I'm a big fan. I'm a very linear thinker. So for those of you that aren't, I apologize if you're one of those people that likes more spirals than lists. I guess I could make this into a spiral. But the whole idea is that we have to know what our need is, okay? So in this case, in my example, we needed to know what the problem was and why our Algebra 1 results at this particular school were not very good. So we had to diagnose what the need was. Then we had to figure out what it was that were our objectives that we needed to be able to do and take care of to help them. We then had to select the right content. So content includes materials, it may include the curriculum, etc. Then we had to organize the content. Well, I will tell you, the minute we got to diagnosis of need and we looked at objectives, we knew immediately that the curriculum was bad. So we also have to select the right learning experiences. Sorry, my computer is doing some very weird stuff, sorry. We have to organize those, and then we have to know if what we're doing in terms of evaluation is going to get us where we need to go. So don't always trust the district's curriculum, I will tell you that. Another school that did really well, I asked them, I said, what'd you do? What'd you do that was different? And they said we threw out the algebra curriculum because we figured out really quickly it wasn't very good and it wasn't going to get us what we needed. So, the principal told me, she said, I'll be honest with you, she said, technically I'm insubordinate. The district said I had to follow the curriculum, but I didn't. I gave my teachers the freedom to create their own. And I said, good for you. And I'm glad that, can we borrow what you guys did? Because it was good stuff. Okay, so why is this not working? Sorry, guys. It's just being difficult for me today. Slideshow, work. Okay, there we go. Now, so one of the things that you can do to really look at things is called the zoom in, zoom out tactic. Oftentimes schools will plan a year at a time. Really progressive schools will plan 3 years out. Schools that are considered stellar will plan 5 years out. Well, I'm telling you that you really have to be looking 10 to 20 years ahead. Not just 1, not 3, not 5. So one of the things we know is states change their assessments about every 5 to 10 years. So think about what is it that's going to be expected of our students in 10 years. And then backload that, or use backwards design to really get to where you need to be. So it's like if we look 10 to 20 years out, and we break that down so we know where we need to be in 5, where we need to be in 3, where we need to be in 1. So let me give you an example of what this might look like. So one of the things that I had K-12 principals that I was responsible for. So I had my high school principals bring in student writing samples from like a top achieving student, like the valedictorian type student, an average student, and a low performing student. And I made my principals who had pre-K students, pre-K through 5, look at those samples and say, based on what you're doing right now, starting in pre-K through 5th grade, can you get your students to at least the average students writing by the time they get to high school? And it was a huge, so that we're looking at, if you're thinking pre-K, we're looking at a 3-year or 13-year sort of zoom out. And it was this incredible sort of aha moment where they went, oh my gosh, there's no way that if we keep doing what we're doing in pre-K, kinder, and first, will they be able to write and produce the kinds of things that are being expected of our high school students, particularly our seniors. So they collaboratively got together and completely revamped what we were doing in terms of literacy and writing and all of those things. We brought in writers workshop, etc., to make sure they were really prepared. So when it may sound strange to look 10 years out, but if you think about it, students are going to be in the schooling system 12 to 13 years. And if we don't know what's expected of them when they get to that senior year, and we're backloading and preparing from pre-K forward, we're completely missing the boat. So a critical piece of this, okay? So I'm not going to walk you through all of this, but these are the steps that you would go through to use this particular strategy. So this is another way to look at it for the zoom out, zoom in. So think about, what do we need our students to do by the time they're seniors? What's going to be required for them to be successful? And so we came up with the idea of writing on demand. That, students are used to writing in canned or simulated type sessions. So for example, they might be able to write a 3-paragraph essay by the time they're in 4th or 5th grade, if I give them a prompt. What can a 5th grader do what I expect my seniors to do, which is, if you're taking the AP test and I'm wanting you to compare and contrast 2 pieces of literature on change and how change is, exemplified in these 2 pieces, that's a writing on demand sort of thing. So what would that look like in 5th grade? Then as I zoom in, I'm going to define what are those most high impact initiatives. And we chose 3. Writing on demand, basic literacy, and basic numeracy. So those were our high-packed initiatives. And then what was it we needed to do to take action to make this work? So we had to completely revamp the way we taught writing. We completely revamped what literacy looked like and defined it by each grade level. We also did the same thing for numeracy. So if you want to see some really good examples, it's called Breaking Ranks. it's from the NASSP, or the National Association of Secondary School Principals. They use this strategy and they give you great tools to do that. So we trained everybody in breaking ranks. We used all those tools and templates. And I'm very proud to say that after we had done this about 5 years, we had amazing results, amazing results. So good stuff here. Another place you can go for really strong instruction, I am a huge, huge guru of Robert Marzano. I think he is like the best of the best when it comes to best practices for teaching. He has a website with tons of free resources. And in there, he has what's called a critical concept paper. So basically, he approached and created these tools with this in mind. We have too much to teach. I think everybody can agree on that. If you look at the standards, way more than we can possibly ever teach. There's too little time to teach it all. And there's also too many guidelines. So one of the things that we found in Dallas, and this was also true when I worked in Irving at the assistant superintendent level, we were really tying the hands of our teachers and our principals, because it was like, you must do this in this time frame and blah, blah, blah. And we sort of gave them this canned curriculum that in theory should have helped, but it was really hindering what needed to happen. So Marzano went in and he looked at all of the main core, common core standards and how we could condense those, or we could put them together to be able to teach these the way we need to. So, here's our dilemma as teachers, do I try to cover it all and just do it in a cursory manner? How do I know what's most important? Because you're not there as a test analyzer. You don't spend all your time working on curriculum. You actually teach. So this is what Marzano went in and did for you. So here's why he did it. And here's what he told us. Number one, standards have to be unpacked. I know that districts oftentimes will unpack a standard for you, but I'm telling you now, there's something about getting your hands in there and getting dirty with it and really understanding what needs to be done, and unpacking the standard will make you a better teacher just by going through that exercise. The other part of it too is we also know that unpacking standard is the foundation to ensure alignment between curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So let's go back to my algebra curriculum example. What we found was the mathematics department in Dallas, which was a large group of, quote, math professionals, they didn't really unpack the standards like they needed to. So they had created all kinds of activities because that was their focus, and they did not ensure that what we were teaching met the depth and complexity of the way things were going to be assessed. Okay, so too often people will believe that curriculum is all about activities or a sequence of events, when really the best curriculum spend time unpacking standards. We know that when we do this and we do it well, you have reliability and alignment across raters or teachers or anybody else looking at this. So it doesn't matter whether you have Ms. Smith or Ms. Jones for your Algebra 1 teacher. If we've done a good job of unpacking the standards, everybody is teaching in a reliable and valid system what needs to be taught. So crosswalks and alignment tools become invaluable. And Marzano and his group of researchers have done this work for you. So if, like I said, I'm just a big fan of Marzano, go in and look at his critical concepts where he has done this for you. And he's going to tell you, teach this standard, spend less time on this one, okay? And even if they're not the exact standards you're using, so like in Texas, they never used Common Core, they're still close enough that you can figure out what are the high stakes ones and which aren't within your own state's curriculum, okay? We also know too that instruction matters. So if your school or your team or your department or your grade level, whatever, does not have expectations for what best practices and instructional strategies need to be used, that's a great place to start after you unpack your standards. That would be the next step. A lot of teachers don't know what a best practice is, or if they do, like everybody's like, oh yeah, I know about cooperative learning. but do you really know about cooperative learning? Because what I've found is I will go in classroom after classroom after classroom and see teachers implementing cooperative learning, but they're doing it incorrectly, or they're only doing pieces of it, or whatever. So very important that we really understand what best practices are and how to use them effectively. Learning is planned. Guys, I've very, very rarely seen a teacher who can fly by the seat of their pants and have effective instruction consistently. Also, as I said, there are lots of tools that we can use that will really help. So according to Marzano, these are the 9 most effective instructional strategies. So if you're doing things around identifying similarities and differences, so that whole idea of compare and contrast, compare and contrast. Reinforce strong efforts, use cooperative learning correctly, help students with cues, questions, and advanced organizers. And again, these are pretty simple, but they're also extremely powerful. So let's talk for a second about non-linguistic representations. So I may have shared with you guys that one of the things we saw in our learning walks, and learning walks included campus leadership as well as all teachers. We noticed that we were doing a terrible job teaching vocabulary. So we decided, okay, what's a better way? So we went to Marzano and actually used his book, Teaching Academic Vocabulary, and we trained everybody in it, and we expected, and we also inspected to make sure everybody was using his strategy to teach a vocabulary. And what you do in Marzano's vocabulary is you have a sheet of paper, you divide it into 4 quadrants. So the first one is, here's the word, and in the first quadrant, the student writes the dictionary definition. In the second quadrant, the students create a pictorial or a drawing of that word. So let's say the word is masturbate. Not masturbate, which means to infuse. So like you would infuse a watermelon with, I don't know, pomegranate juice, okay? So the student wrote the definition, then they had to write a picture or draw a picture of that representation. Then they had to do a Google search and find what Google told them about this. And then they finally had to create a context where they could use this word. When we started doing that, our vocabulary scores went through the roof, as opposed to what we had been doing. So non-linguistic representations are powerful ways to really create learning for students because they create a picture in their mind that they can use, okay? Other things you may want to look at, and I've given you the websites for strong best practices and backed in research. Bloom's taxonomy, obviously we know what that is. It's been around 1,000 years, but we need to make sure we're actually using this. Washoe County has a great wealth of instructional practices that you can use and look at, as does the Institute for Learning out of the University of Pittsburgh. We also know too that TeachThought is another great resource. So if you want to look at and decide what are some really good best practices that I can use in instruction, or as a principal I can teach my teachers, or whatever, here's some easy, quick resources you can go to. Okay, so let's talk for a minute too about assessing and examining student work. Oftentimes, we think that we have assessed or examined student work when we assign a grade. Okay, so you have a students write, I don't know, do 10 math problems, you grade it, they get a score, done. That's really not how we can, that's not the most effective way to use student work to do what we need to. So remember, as a part of examining student work and really looking at assessment, there's 2 kinds, formative and summative. You should know this. Formative assessments are said to be for learning, while summative assessments are to look at the learning. So a great example of formative and summative assessment is, and I love this quote, when the cook tastes the soup, that's formative assessment. When the customer tastes the soup, that's summative assessment. So to me, that's a great just little analogy that really kind of describes the difference between the 2. We know what summative assessment is. Here it's defined for you. It's used to evaluate student learning or achievement at the conclusion of a defined instructional period. Okay, so summative assessment can be done at the end of a unit. It may be done as a benchmark 3 times a year. Summative assessment may be your once a year state assessment. Generally speaking, here is how they are defined. I'm not going to walk you through this. You can absolutely read it at your leisure. Formative assessment is designed to advance students' learning while their learning is still in the process of developing. So in my freshman seminar class that I teach here at LSUS, we have a demonstration of learning or a formative assessment at the end of every class. And all it is, it's not for me, I don't take a grade on it. It's for me to know if they're getting what I'm teaching and if I need to reteach some students or I need to reteach the whole class or like, by golly, everybody mastered it, we're good to move forward. So it's part of a feedback loop for the student as well as me as the teacher so I can make the necessary adjustments. Okay, so here's when it talks about what formative assessments. It's only effective when you let them know what their intended learning goal is. So even in my graduate, or my college level course, I have a learning objective I write on the board every day. Every single day there's a learning objective written in SMART goal format. So students will be able to, I don't know, we've been working on budgeting. So students will be able to create a budget with the following expenses with 100% accuracy by the end of this class. How do I know that? Then I have a quick check at the end, what's the maximum amount you should be spending every month and a percentage for rent, food, and miscellaneous items. You have to make sure that you let the students know what you expect. And even though I don't make a big deal about the learning goal, the demonstration of learning, my students look at it every single day. And they tell me, they will come up to me after class and go, you know what, I didn't get this. Can you help me? That kind of stuff. Okay. So feedback obtained from planned evidence is essential to help us shape the new learning. It's also helpful to the students so they can gauge their own learning. Because believe it or not, they really do want to learn what you're teaching. Students in formative assessment have to know what the learning target is. They should be able to self-assess. So I have my students all the time, on a note card, tell me, how you felt about what you learned today. Where would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? What do you feel confident that you know? What is it you don't know? Takes 5 minutes, invaluable for not only them and metacognitively to plan ahead and look at where they are, but also for me as a teacher. Okay, so here's kind of a graphic that shows the difference between the two. Low stakes, formative assessments, always low stakes, summative is high stakes, okay? And some examples. So, formative assessment or a demonstration of learning, here it is as defined for you. Summative assessment, one piece of that can be examining student work. That is a summative assessment tool. So, how do we know if we're doing a good formative assessment? So do students demonstrate what they're learning? It looks at a check for understanding as well as mastery. And it asks the critical questions. Are students actually on track to master this level of content? So there's a website you can go to and see this kind of in action. So here are some examples of good formative assessment or a demonstration of learning. Students can do a quick audio recording and send it to you. They can create an animation. They can write a short blog entry. They can do a drawing. They can do a flow chart. They can create a collage. I try to vary mine all the time so that it's not always one particular way that I'm assessing their learning. And I'll tell you, I get some really cool, like when I had them create an avatar based on their learning that day, it was really cool. I was amazed at what some of my students who I didn't think were maybe as proficient at the learning, when I gave them that as an option, they really were able to shine and show what they'd learned. Summative assessment can be done, like I said, we typically think of that as a test or culminating project or whatever, but it can also be used by examining students' work. So let's look at, so why do we want to do this? It's a way to look at student learning, the intent, important to do it with a colleague or colleagues because they're going to see things you may not. So you have to put yourself out there and be willing to share and be vulnerable. And generally what I would do is if we're going to be examining student work is I have people bring in, their A student work, their C student work, and their failing students work. And we trade. So if there's 10 of us in the group, everybody pass yours to the right. And there's a set of questions or a protocol that we use to look at that work and to really see if we met the standard that was being taught on that work. It helps you as a teacher. It helps to have another set of eyes on the work that you're doing. And also too, we've had those moments where it's like, gosh, guys, I realized my learning task wasn't very high level. So I need some help. How do I do this? Or I'm looking at Susie's work that her students did. And I'm like, my gosh, this is absolutely aligned to the standard, high rigor, very relevant. So we all decide that next time we teach this concept or this particular lesson, we're going to use her assignment as a way to look at how students are performing. Okay, so there's a way that you go through this, and I'm not going to like I said, this is very long, but I literally walk you through step by step. So this is an example that we did with high school Algebra 1 teachers. We looked at their students' work, and specifically we were looking for trends, and then we also disaggregated it by race, subskill areas, and item level analysis. So we had multiple tasks. This wasn't just one test. And we looked at, because we had asked our students to start saving an exemplar, like I said, in those 3 categories, your A student, your C student, your F, by year. So we also, you can do this in real time for something you just completed, or in this case, we looked at it across 3 years. So we pulled work from 2017, 2018, 2019 to see how we were teaching a particular concept and to see where we were. And these were the conclusions we came up with. So, okay, ground rules: be in the spirit of dialogue, focus on the evidence, not what you think. Put your stake in the ground and be ready to move it. So be willing to talk about and defend or acquiesce, I guess, to what other people are telling you. Okay, so here's one way that we did it. This was the actual assignment. Here was what we did to look at the criteria. So for example, did it describe functional? Did it do all of these things? Because this is what we needed students to be able to do from unpacking the standard, okay? And here's, what the teacher said, and then whether or not the task that was given to the students really satisfied this criteria. So what we found is in 2017, we didn't have a lot of check marks over here in the solution satisfies criteria. We did better in 18. By 19, we had it down. So see why it's helpful sometimes too to look across years as well as at an immediate task. Okay, so here's how we do it. You start with what it is the expectation. Here's what we talked about. We looked at it, what we observed. We also always include what is the evidence. And this was done individually. Then we talked about it as a table. Here's a sample that, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. Here's another sample. What was our teacher learning from it? Here's the protocol. Okay, so if you're like me, you like steps, here's what you do step by step. Identify the purpose of this exercise of looking at student work. Provide information on the context, because context matters. Participants actually do the task. So if it's an Algebra 1 problem, we actually had to work the problem. Then we're going to share and talk about solutions. We're going to look at the student work individually and in small groups, answering two key questions. We're going to share and discuss in the large group. Then we're going to summarize, because that's what this is all about, is looking for trends. Okay? Here's some tips that may help you. Here's again, when you're going to do this as a team or department or with your principal, what are some guidelines on what we want teachers to bring to the table? Students are often most comfortable sharing their best work. So in this particular example, you can also, instead of doing an A-level piece of work, a C or an F, you can also do two samples. Ask teachers to bring 2 samples for the student who gets it, the student who doesn't get it, 2 examples that were just confusing, you know, you're kind of like, I don't know what the student was doing, or 2 interesting or unusual samples. One of the things that is my personal pet peeve, but also I see happen all the time, you know, teachers, particularly in math, you must show your work, you must show your work, you must show your work. Whereas I had students who could simply look at the problem and get the right answer. Did I really need them to show me their work or not? So I would always bring those examples, and we talk about and debate about whether or not students really needed to show their work, or, you know, some students can just manipulate that's in their mind, and if you make them show their work, they make a mistake. So again, interesting or unusual examples can be a really interesting and thought-provoking, helpful way to look at student work samples. Okay, when do you do this? Again, here's some ideas and thoughts. And here are some resources that, like I said, if you want to go to and use. So UT, my alma mater, the University of Texas, has a whole center devoted to mathematics and the teaching of mathematics in an effective way. They have some great resources. I don't know if they've expanded beyond math now or not. There was some talk about including like science and maybe English, but again, just some nice resources that you can use. Okay, so wow, that was a pretty quick whirlwind of 53 slides. So what comments or questions or concerns or just, you know, whatever do you guys have after, like I said, the whirlwind tour of 53 slides? Okay, I know it's midweek. We just came off Thanksgiving break. If you're like me, you're already counting down to the winter break, which I know is deadly to do. But for me, I have exactly 12 days, 12 work days left. Oh, Melissa, that's a good question. Where's a good place to find top curriculums? There are 3 places that I would go. One of them is from Bill Daggett. And his last name, it's D-A-G-G-E-T-T. He's the one who created the Rigor Relevance Relationship Matrix for effective schooling. He has gone in and looked at every state's curriculum and pulled out what basically are non-essential standards and condensed those for you. He doesn't give you a lot of instructional strategies within the curriculum, but the fact that he's gone in and condensed the curriculum is pretty impressive. He's also done some unpacking. Obviously, Marzano, great work and great stuff on his website. Another one, believe it or not, is Plano School District in Texas. They have one of the best curriculums I've ever seen. So good, in fact, that we talked about when I was in Irving, seeing if we could purchase their curriculum from them. Because what they do, what I like about the Plano curriculum, and I know you guys are not in Texas necessarily, but what I like about their model, they take master teachers, their very best teachers who are working in every kind of school, the most affluent school to truly, you know, a 99% poverty rate. They pay those teachers to teach half a day, then the other half of every single day they report to central office and they work on the curriculum. So it's always up to date and being done and worked on by practitioners. It's based on that continuous improvement model. And so, like I said, curriculum is a dynamic process. You're never done. And that's why I particularly like those. Yeah, and Melissa, yeah. Be careful about canned curriculums in the sense of curriculum is dynamic. I cannot predict, you know, if I teach this lesson today, I can't predict what I'm going to teach tomorrow until I see how today went. And that's why I like the Plano model, because it's done in real time. And so you've got practitioners who are going, taught the lesson today, and they do a blog, you know, taught the lesson number blah, blah, blah on such and such today. And let me tell you, this strategy bombed in my class. So here's what I'm going to do instead tomorrow. So that's why it's really helpful. Another one that I like, it's not a curriculum per se, but it's Margaret Kilgo, and it's Kilgo. She does great work with unpacking standards. Great, great work. And at the end of the day, if you do a good job unpacking the standards and you use instructional practices and you just constantly check back and align to the assessment, you're going to have a great curriculum. There's one more. Heidi Hayes Jacobs has some really good stuff too. Trying to think, there's somebody else too. It's on the tip of my tongue. Who is it? Schlechte. Yeah, Phil Schlechte. I'll type his name because it's just too hard to spell. He's another good curriculum sort of guru to go to. But like, you know, and again, be a savvy consumer of curriculum, because I would be hard pressed to write a curriculum that's going to work, you know, in Melissa's class, and is also going to work in Rachel's class, and is going to work in Mary's class, even if they were all in the same state, even if we're all in the same district. You know, so I know when I was principal at Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Dallas, the district's curriculum wasn't any good. And my teachers told me, I said, it's terrible. So we took what was good out of it and used it, and we created our own out of the rest. And we got amazing results because my teachers really knew what needed to be taught and how it needed to be taught. And in a district as large as Dallas with 155,000 students and 432 square miles, I'll tell you what we were teaching at our school in downtown, sitting in the heart of downtown Dallas, was vastly different than teaching in Seagoville, which was also part of the Dallas ISD, that was very rural. I mean, you know, we were in two different places. So like I said, be a cautious consumer or a savvy consumer of curriculum. And, you know, I teach an urban ed class too, and part of what we talked about tonight was the fact that I believe in teacher and principal autonomy. And as long as you get results, I don't care how you get there, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical. And so we would use parts that were good, we'd throw out the rest, we'd create our own, and we were constantly readjusting. Because like I said, what worked today may not work tomorrow, because you have actual physical human beings that you're teaching and not widgets. We're not producing widgets. Okay, did I answer your question, or did I just go off on a rant? Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, any other questions, comments, concerns? Let me check my time here real quick. Well, we are coming up on the end, so just it's our last Zoom meeting together, which I'm a little bit excited about, but I'm also sad. You guys have been, honestly, I've taught EDL 710 probably a dozen times now. You have been my best group of students. I have just absolutely loved the work you've done. I've learned so much from you guys. And so, you know, I'm going to miss getting to work with you. But I'm very proud of the work that you guys have done and the progress that I've seen you guys make. You know, so you're going to be like amazing, dynamic school leaders. So I'm hopeful for the future because 50% of all current principals can and will retire in the next 5 years. You know, I was one of those. If you look at the last 5 years, I moved to central office for 3 years, and then I'm like, I'm out, I'm done. You know, lots of opportunities moving ahead, and you guys are going to be superstars. So best of luck. If there's anything I can ever do for you in the future, do not hesitate to reach out and stay in touch. We love hearing what our students are doing on in the future. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to end our meeting. Thank you, guys. You have a great night, and best of luck to you in the future. Thanks.